Ambassador Sarah Chen sat at the circular table, her hands folded calmly as the Galactic Council erupted around her. The massive chamber, built to house representatives from over 200 species, echoed with angry chittering, growling, and the electronic translations that followed. She had expected this reaction when she delivered humanity's message, but the intensity still surprised her. "This is madness!" screeched Ambassador Vextar, his forearms waving frantically. The insectoid Zenthari had always been dramatic, but today he seemed particularly agitated. His translator crackled as it converted his rapid clicks into standard galactic. "Humans cannot simply abandon their responsibilities to the galaxy." Sarah remained seated while chaos swirled around her. The other human delegates, Ambassador Rodriguez from the Americas sector and Ambassador Singh from the Asian territories, flanked her with similar calm. They had rehearsed this moment for months, ever since Earth's unified government made their decision. "Order, order!" boomed Council Prime Thuldorian, his massive bulk rising from the central platform. The ancient Varathi's voice carried across the chamber like distant thunder. His species had founded the Galactic Council 3,000 years ago, long before humanity had even discovered fire. "We will have civil discourse, or I will clear this chamber." The noise gradually subsided, but Sarah could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. She stood slowly, her simple blue diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by most other delegates. "Honored Council," she began, her voice steady and clear, "humanity's decision is final. We formally withdraw from the Galactic Council, effective immediately." The silence that followed was somehow worse than the previous chaos. Sarah could see the shock on dozens of alien faces, those that had faces. Some species communicated their emotions through color changes, pheromone releases, or electromagnetic fields, but the universal translator systems made their distress clear to everyone. "But why?" asked Ambassador Kriana, her melodious voice carrying the confusion of her entire species. The crystalline resonants were known for their logical approach to everything, and they clearly couldn't process this decision. "Humans have been valuable council members for over 50 years. Your species has contributed significantly to galactic peace and prosperity." Sarah had practiced this part of her speech hundreds of times, but it still felt heavy on her tongue. The Council has repeatedly ignored humanity's proposals for reform. We have watched as bureaucracy strangles progress and as political games take precedence over the needs of actual citizens across the galaxy. "Specific examples, please," demanded Ambassador Zorth, the militaristic Krex representative. His scarred features and battle-worn armor made him look like he had stepped directly off an ancient battlefield. "These are serious accusations." Sarah activated her personal display, and holographic data filled the space above the table. 3 years ago, we proposed the Rapid Response Protocol to address pirate attacks in the Outer Rim. The proposal has been under review ever since, while 17 colonies have fallen to raiders. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Outer Rim problems were well known, but most council members preferred to ignore them since those territories didn't vote in council elections. 2 years ago, Sarah continued, we suggested updating the Trade Regulation Code to prevent the exploitation of developing worlds. That proposal was rejected because it might disrupt established economic relationships. Those are complex issues requiring careful consideration, protested Ambassador Veltharion of the Merchant Hegemony. His species had built their entire civilization on trade, and they clearly saw any regulation as a threat. Last year, Sarah said, her voice growing harder, we proposed the Emergency Medical Assistance Act after the plague outbreak on Kepler 442b. While you debated the financial implications for 6 months, 2 million beings died. The chamber fell silent again. The Kepler incident was still fresh in everyone's memory, and the slow council response had been embarrassing for everyone involved. Council Prime Thuldorian leaned forward on his platform. "These are fair criticisms, Ambassador Chen, but the proper response is reform, not abandonment. Surely we can address these concerns within the existing framework." Sarah shook her head. Earth's government has lost faith in the Council's ability to reform itself. We've spent 50 years watching the same patterns repeat. Every crisis results in committees. Every committee results in subcommittees, and every subcommittee results in years of debate while real problems go unsolved. "What exactly do you intend to do?" asked Ambassador Kriana, her crystalline form shifting through several colors as she processed the implications. "Humanity will handle its own affairs from now on," Ambassador Rodriguez said, speaking for the first time during the session. "We will maintain diplomatic relations with individual species and governments, but we will no longer participate in this body." "And what of your obligations?" Vextar's voice pitched higher with agitation. "The Mutual Defense Pact? The Technology Sharing Agreement? The Educational Exchange Program?" "All formal agreements between Earth and the Council are hereby terminated," Ambassador Singh announced. "Individual nations on Earth may choose to maintain bilateral relationships with specific species, but humanity as a whole withdraws from all multilateral Council frameworks." The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. Humanity had become integral to dozens of Council operations over the past 50 years. Their military was small but highly effective, their technology was innovative in ways that often surprised other species, and their educational institutions had become popular with young beings from across the galaxy. "You cannot be serious," whispered Ambassador Yilthara of the Academic Consortium. "Human universities teach over 40,000 non-human students annually. Human research has revolutionized everything from agricultural techniques to space navigation." "The research will continue," Sarah replied, "but it will be conducted independently of Council oversight and regulation." "This is economic warfare," snarled Ambassador Veltharian. "Humans control key shipping routes, maintain several critical space stations, and operate some of the most efficient planetary terraforming operations in the galaxy. You're holding the entire galactic economy hostage." Sarah's expression remained neutral. "We're not threatening anyone. We're simply choosing to manage our own affairs. Other species are free to develop their own solutions to replace any services humanity currently provides." Council Prime Thuldorian stood to his full impressive height. "I must ask you to reconsider this decision. The Galactic Council has maintained peace for over 3 millennia. Breaking that unity could have catastrophic consequences." "The Council has maintained the appearance of peace," Sarah corrected. "Meanwhile, millions suffer in the Outer Rim territories. Developing worlds are stripped of resources by established powers, and bureaucratic paralysis prevents effective responses to genuine emergencies. Humanity chooses to step away from that system." "And if other species follow your example?" asked Ambassador Zorth bluntly. "What if this decision triggers the collapse of the entire galactic government?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "Then perhaps the galaxy needs a different kind of government, one that prioritizes action over procedure, results over politics, and the welfare of citizens over the comfort of officials." The chamber erupted again. But this time, Sarah wasn't listening to the angry voices. She was watching faces, reading body language, interpreting the subtle communications of dozens of species. Some were genuinely angry, others seemed confused or frightened. But a few, particularly among the smaller, less influential delegations, looked thoughtful. Ambassador Kriana's form had shifted to a deep blue that indicated contemplation. The resonants were natural philosophers, and they were clearly processing the logical implications of humanity's arguments. Similarly, several representatives from Outer Rim territories were exchanging glances that suggested they might not entirely disagree with the human position. "This session is adjourned," Council Prime Tholdorian announced, his voice heavy with what might have been sadness or anger. It was difficult to tell with his species. We will reconvene tomorrow to discuss the implications of this development. As the chamber began to empty, Sarah and her fellow ambassadors remained seated until most of the other delegates had left. Finally, they stood and walked toward the exit together, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. "Well," Rodriguez said quietly, "we've certainly given them something to think about. The question now," Singh added, "is whether they'll actually think or just react." Sarah nodded, looking back at the empty chamber one last time. "Either way, humanity charts its own course from here, for better or worse." As they walked through the corridors of the council building, Sarah couldn't help but notice the stares and whispers that followed them. News of humanity's withdrawal was already spreading through the diplomatic quarter, and she could imagine the chaos that would soon follow. But she also felt something she hadn't experienced in years of frustrating council sessions: hope. For the first time in decades, humanity would be free to act according to its own values and priorities, without needing approval from a committee that valued consensus over effectiveness. The galaxy was about to discover what humans could accomplish when they stopped asking for permission and started taking action. Sarah suspected it would be a lesson that many would remember for a very long time. Outside the council building, their transport waited in the designated diplomatic area. As they climbed aboard, Sarah took one last look at the towering spires that housed the galaxy's most powerful government. "Take us home," she told the pilot. "We have work to do." 6 months after humanity's dramatic exit from the Galactic Council, the consequences were rippling across known space like waves from a dropped stone. Admiral Torvik Hauptmann sat in the command center of the human deep space monitoring station Horizon's Edge, watching displays that showed the growing chaos throughout the galaxy. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Martinez from the communications station, "we're receiving another distress call from the Kepler sector. That's the 5th one this week." Hauptmann rubbed his temple, feeling the weight of decisions he couldn't make. "Same as before, Lieutenant. Log the call and forward it to the Council Emergency Response Center." "Sir." "The Council Emergency Response Center doesn't exist anymore. They shut it down last month due to budgetary restructuring." The Admiral closed his eyes for a moment. The Council's response to humanity's withdrawal had been even more dysfunctional than expected. Instead of addressing the problems that drove humans away, they had begun cutting services and pointing fingers at each other. "Then forward it to whatever passes for emergency services in that sector," he said finally. "There isn't any, sir. The local government collapsed 2 weeks ago. Pirates have taken over most of the system." Hauptmann turned to look at the young officer. "What about the Council Defense Force?" "They're tied up with the trade war between the Hegemony and the Zenthari Collective. 3 battle fleets are just sitting there watching each other instead of dealing with actual problems." This was becoming a daily occurrence. Without human diplomatic intervention, old conflicts were resurging across the galaxy. The humans had often served as mediators in disputes, their relative neutrality and practical approach making them effective peacekeepers. Now those same disputes were escalating without anyone to broker solutions. "Sir?" Martinez waited for orders that Hauptmann couldn't give. Earth's new government had been crystal clear. Humanity would no longer involve itself in galactic conflicts unless directly threatened. They were to observe, record, but not intervene. "Just keep monitoring," the Admiral said reluctantly, "and add it to the weekly report to Earth Command." Meanwhile, 3 sectors away, Dr. Elena Vasquez was dealing with a different kind of crisis. The research station she directed had been humanity's primary contribution to the Galactic Medical Research Initiative, and now dozens of species were discovering just how much they had relied on human innovation. "Dr. Vasquez," her assistant Dr. Kepler called from across the laboratory. We've got another delegation here from the Tau Ceti Medical Consortium. They want to know if we'll reconsider the licensing agreements for the cellular regeneration matrix. Elena didn't look up from her microscope. Same answer as before, David. All council-related research agreements have been terminated. If individual governments want to negotiate bilateral arrangements, they're welcome to contact Earth through proper diplomatic channels. They're offering triple the previous licensing fees. And the council spent 8 months debating whether to approve clinical trials while beings died from diseases we could have cured, Elena replied sharply. Money was never the issue. Through the laboratory windows, she could see ships from a dozen different species docked at the research station. All of them wanted access to human medical research, but none of them seemed to understand why the research had been restricted in the first place. The cellular regeneration matrix was a perfect example. Human researchers had developed a technique that could repair damaged tissue at the genetic level, effectively curing dozens of previously terminal conditions. But the Council's Medical Ethics Committee had spent months debating whether the treatment was naturally derived enough to meet their philosophical guidelines. During those months, Elena had watched colleagues from other species struggle with diseases that human medicine could easily cure, but council regulations prevented treatment. The frustration had been overwhelming, and it was one of the many factors that led to humanity's decision to withdraw. Now, 6 months later, the same species that had supported the council's restrictive policies were desperate for access to the treatments they had previously banned. Dr. Vasquez, came another voice from the communications station. We're receiving a priority transmission from the resonant homeworld. They're reporting a new plague outbreak and requesting immediate assistance. Elena finally looked up from her work. The resonants had always been fair in their dealings with humanity, and their ambassador Kriana had been one of the few council members to express genuine understanding of human frustrations. What kind of plague? Crystalline structure degradation. It appears to be spreading through their harmonic communication networks. Elena frowned. This was exactly the kind of exotic disease that required human expertise to solve. Most other species approached medicine from their own biological perspectives, but humans had a unique ability to understand and treat conditions affecting completely alien physiologies. Contact Earth Medical Command, she said after a moment. Request permission to provide humanitarian assistance outside council frameworks. It was a risk. Earth's government had forbidden involvement in council affairs, but they had left room for individual humanitarian decisions. Elena hoped they would see this the same way. Back at the council chambers, the situation was deteriorating daily. Ambassador Vexitar of the Zenthari stood before an emergency session, his 4 arms gesticulating wildly as he addressed a chamber that was notably less full than it had been 6 months earlier. The economic disruption continues to spread, he chittered. Human-operated shipping routes have been abandoned, causing supply shortages across 17 sectors. Their terraforming operations have ceased, leaving 3 developing worlds without viable atmospheric processing. And their educational institutions have closed their doors to non-human students. Council Prime Thuldorian looked older and more tired than ever before. The ancient Vorathi had led the council for over 2 centuries, but the current crisis was testing his leadership in ways he had never experienced. What responses have been proposed? He asked wearily. The hegemony suggests economic sanctions against Earth, Vextar replied. The Krex military faction recommends a show of force to demonstrate that the galaxy will not tolerate such disruption, and the academic consortium has proposed sending a formal apology and requesting humanity's return to council membership. And what does our analysis suggest about the likely success of these approaches? Ambassador Kriana rose from her position, her crystalline form shifting through colors that indicated careful consideration. All projections show extremely low probability of success. Economic sanctions would hurt us more than them, since we depend on human services more than they depend on our markets. Military action against Earth is—" She paused, considering her words carefully. "Inadvisable, given humanity's demonstrated capabilities and the fact that they maintain defense agreements with several major powers outside the Council, and our diplomatic overtures have been consistently ignored." "Then what do you recommend?" Thuldorian asked. "Adaptation," Kriana said simply. "We must learn to function without human participation. Develop our own solutions to the problems they previously helped us solve." "That could take decades," protested Ambassador Veltharian of the Hegemony. "Our entire economic model assumes Council cooperation and human logistical support. Without their shipping networks and space station operations, interstellar trade becomes prohibitively expensive for most smaller worlds." "Then perhaps," Kriana said quietly, "we should have listened more carefully when they warned us this would happen." The chamber fell silent. Everyone remembered Sarah Chen's final speech, her warnings about the consequences of continued inaction. At the time, most delegates had dismissed her words as political theater. Now they were discovering just how literally she had meant every word. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim territories, the situation was becoming desperate. Captain Marcus Webb of the independent freight hauler Defiant Spirit was discovering that the collapse of human-operated shipping routes had left entire sectors cut off from galactic commerce. "Captain," his navigator called, "we're approaching the frontier station, but sir, there's almost nothing left." Webb looked at his view screen and cursed under his breath. Frontier Station had once been a thriving hub of commercial activity, maintained jointly by human and alien crews. Now it showed signs of severe neglect and decay. What happened to the maintenance crews? Human personnel were recalled 6 months ago, when Earth withdrew from Council agreements. The other species, well, sir, none of them had the technical expertise to maintain human-built systems. This was the dirty secret that the Council was only beginning to understand. Humanity's contributions to galactic infrastructure went far beyond the obvious diplomatic and military roles. Human engineers had designed many of the technological systems that kept galactic civilization functioning smoothly. They had a talent for creating robust, adaptable technology that could be operated by dozens of different species, but maintaining and repairing that technology required a specifically human approach to problem-solving that other species struggled to replicate. "Can we dock safely?" Webb asked. "Docking Bay 3 shows green status, but life support in the station is intermittent. Whatever you need to do here, Captain, I'd recommend doing it quickly." Webb nodded grimly. He was carrying medical supplies to colonies that had been cut off from regular shipping for months. The colonies had sent what little currency they could scrape together, but it wasn't enough to attract the major shipping companies. Only independent operators like Webb were willing to make these runs, and there weren't nearly enough of them. As his ship settled into the docking bay, Webb reflected on the irony of the situation. The Council had spent years complaining about human interference in galactic affairs, suggesting that humanity was too aggressive, too impatient, too willing to act without proper authorization. Now they were discovering what the galaxy looked like without that interference. Systems failed because no one had the expertise to fix them. Conflicts escalated because no one was willing to mediate them. People suffered because bureaucratic process had become more important than actual results. Back on Earth, President Maya Okafor was reading reports that confirmed everything her government had predicted. The Global Communications Center in Geneva buzzed with activity as information flowed in from human observers throughout the galaxy. "Madame President," her aide announced, "we have updates from 17 sectors. Pirate activity is up 300% in the Outer Rim. The Xanthari hegemony trade dispute has expanded into actual military skirmishes, and we're receiving humanitarian requests from 47 different governments." President Okafor set down the report she had been reading and looked out the window at the city below. Earth itself was thriving. Without the drain of council obligations, human resources had been redirected to solving Earth's own problems and exploring new frontiers. What's our response to the humanitarian requests? The Defense Council recommends case-by-case evaluation for non-council members only. No assistance to any government that remains under council authority. It was a harsh policy, but a necessary one. Earth's government had made it clear that species would have to choose the Council's bureaucratic paralysis or bilateral cooperation with humanity on human terms. And how many governments have formally requested bilateral agreements outside the Council framework? 37 so far, Madam President, including 3 major powers. Okafor nodded. It was beginning exactly as humanity's strategists had predicted. The galaxy was learning that it needed human capabilities more than humans needed council approval. "Schedule a meeting with the cabinet tomorrow," she said. "It's time to discuss our terms for re-engagement." The galaxy was shaking, just as the headlines had predicted. But humanity was no longer asking for permission to fix it. 1 year after humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in a very different kind of meeting room. Instead of the grand chamber that housed hundreds of species, she sat at a simple conference table with representatives from just 12 governments. But these 12 represented over 60% of the galaxy's inhabited worlds. "Thank you all for coming to Geneva," Sarah began, looking around the table at faces that had become familiar over the past months. "I believe we all understand why we're here." Ambassador Kree Anna of the Resonant Confederation nodded, her crystalline form displaying colors that indicated satisfaction. "The bilateral agreements our governments have established with Earth have proven far more effective than decades of council mediation." "Indeed," agreed General Thane Korath of the Free Worlds Alliance. The grizzled warrior had been among the first to break with the Council after witnessing humanity's response to the crisis in his territory. "When the Skull Raiders attacked our outer colonies, human response fleets arrived within days. The Council would have debated jurisdiction for months." Sarah remembered that crisis well. It had been the turning point, the moment when Earth's government realized they could no longer maintain their policy of non-intervention. The Free Worlds Alliance had requested assistance outside council frameworks, and President Okafor had authorized the first post-withdrawal military action. The results had been spectacular. Human tactical doctrine, freed from council restrictions on proportionate response, had eliminated the pirate threat in 3 weeks. More importantly, they had done so with minimal casualties on both sides, using innovative strategies that other species struggled to understand. "The economic benefits have been equally impressive," added Minister Velkorin of the Independent Trade Association. "Direct commerce agreements with Earth have reduced shipping costs by 40% and eliminated the regulatory delays that plagued council-mediated trade." Sarah smiled slightly. The ITA had been formed by merchant guilds from 17 different species, all seeking alternatives to the Council's increasingly dysfunctional economic policies. Earth had been happy to provide those alternatives, but on terms that prioritized efficiency over political considerations. "What about the research initiatives?" asked Dr. Yilthera, representing the new academic consortium. The elderly scientist had led the exodus of researchers from council institutions, frustrated by the endless bureaucratic restrictions on scientific progress. "Remarkable progress," Sarah replied, consulting her notes. "Without council oversight, our joint research programs have achieved breakthroughs that were impossible under the previous system. The cellular regeneration matrix is now available to all NAC member species. The new FTL navigation algorithms have reduced travel times by 30%. And the agricultural enhancement protocols have ended food shortages on 14 worlds." It was true, but Sarah didn't mention the cost. Earth had poured enormous resources into these programs, treating them as investments in a new kind of galactic order. The gamble was paying off, but it had required humanity to take risks that the Council would never have approved. "And what of the Council itself?" asked Ambassador Zular of the Symbiont Collective. His species had been among the most reluctant to break with traditional institutions, but recent events had forced their hand. Sarah's expression grew more serious. "The Council continues to exist, but its influence diminishes daily. 18 more governments have withdrawn over the past 6 months. The remaining members are mostly core worlds that benefit from the current system's inefficiencies." She activated a holographic display that showed the current galactic political map. What had once been a unified council territory was now a patchwork of independent alliances, bilateral agreements, and competing power blocks. "The question before us today," Sarah continued, "is whether we're satisfied with this arrangement or if we want to formalize something more permanent." General Korath leaned forward. "You're talking about a new galactic government." "I'm talking about a practical solution to practical problems," Sarah corrected. "The current system works, but it's inefficient. We have 12 separate agreements where we could have one. We coordinate responses to crises on an ad hoc basis when we could have standing protocols." "But not," Kriana interjected carefully, "a return to the old council model." "Absolutely not," Sarah confirmed. "Any new institution would need to operate on fundamentally different principles: action over deliberation, results over consensus, effectiveness over political comfort." Minister Velkarin's species communicated through pheromone releases, and his translator indicated skepticism. How would such an organization make decisions without endless debate? Sarah had been preparing for this question for months. Through clearly defined authority and accountability. Each member government would retain sovereignty over internal affairs, but would delegate specific powers to a central authority for issues requiring coordinated response. "Such as?" asked Dr. Yilthera. "Defense against external threats, responses to natural disasters or pandemic diseases, coordination of interstellar commerce and communication, scientific research requiring multi-species cooperation." Sarah paused, making eye contact with each representative. "The same issues we're already handling effectively through bilateral agreements, but with better coordination and shared resources." Ambassador Zular's translator indicated concern. "And who would lead this central authority? Which species would hold the primary positions of power?" Sarah had been waiting for this question. It was the heart of the entire proposal, the idea that had taken months of careful diplomacy to make acceptable. "No single species would hold permanent leadership," she said. "The authority would be led by a rotating council of 5 members elected for fixed terms by the member governments. But more importantly, the central authority would be limited to specific enumerated powers. It couldn't expand its reach without explicit approval from member governments." General Korath nodded slowly. "A government of limited powers, designed to accomplish specific tasks efficiently." "Exactly. And if it fails to accomplish those tasks, member governments retain the right to withdraw and seek alternative arrangements." This was the key innovation, the lesson learned from humanity's experience with the Galactic Council. Any new institution had to prove its worth continuously, or it would lose its membership and authority. "There's another consideration," Kriana said quietly. "What about Earth's role in this proposed organization?" The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implications of the question. Humanity had proven indispensable to galactic stability, but they had also demonstrated their willingness to walk away from institutions that didn't serve their interests. Sarah chose her words carefully. "Earth would participate as an equal member, with the same rights and obligations as any other government, but we would not seek special status or permanent leadership positions." "But realistically," General Korath said bluntly, "human capabilities make you more than equal partners. Your military doctrine, your technological innovation, your approach to problem solving, these give you advantages that other species struggle to match. Sarah nodded. That's true. But it's also why any new institution must focus on results rather than political balance. If human methods prove most effective for specific problems, then those methods should be used. If other species develop better solutions, those should be adopted instead. A meritocracy rather than a democracy? Asked Dr. Yilthara. A system that works rather than one that's politically comfortable, Sarah replied. Over the following hours, they discussed details, protocols, and procedures. The conversation was remarkably different from council sessions, focused, practical, and oriented toward solving actual problems rather than maintaining political relationships. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, humanity had walked away from galactic governance in frustration and anger. Now they were helping to design something better, something that prioritized the needs of citizens over the comfort of politicians. I believe we have the framework for an agreement, Kriana said finally, her form shifting through colors that indicated satisfaction and hope. The Alliance of Practical Governance, a confederation of sovereign governments cooperating to address shared challenges. With clearly limited authority, defined accountability, and the permanent right of withdrawal for member governments, added Minister Velkorin. And leadership based on effectiveness rather than political considerations, General Korath concluded. Sarah looked around the table one more time. Then let's draft the formal documents. If our governments approve this proposal, we can begin implementing it within 90 days. As the representatives began working on specific language and procedures, Sarah stepped outside onto the balcony overlooking Lake Geneva. The sun was setting over the Swiss Alps, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Her personal communicator chimed with a priority message from Earth Command. She read it quickly, then smiled. The message was from Admiral Hauptmann at Horizon's Edge, reporting that pirate activity in the Outer Rim had decreased by 80% over the past 6 months. The new bilateral defense agreements had created an efficient network of rapid response that pirates couldn't adapt to quickly enough. More importantly, the message included casualty figures that showed the effectiveness of human tactical doctrine. Where Council forces had historically suffered heavy losses in anti-piracy operations, the new Alliance fleets had achieved their objectives with minimal casualties on all sides. Sarah pocketed the communicator and returned to the meeting room. The representatives were deep in discussion about implementation timelines and resource allocation, their voices animated with the kind of enthusiasm she hadn't heard in council chambers for years. 6 months later, the Alliance of Practical Governance held its first formal session in the orbital facility that had once housed Earth's Council delegation. The station had been expanded and modified to accommodate the new organization's streamlined structure. President Maya Okafor delivered the opening address to representatives from 43 governments, including 12 that had withdrawn from the old council specifically to join the new alliance. We gathered today not as subjects of an imperial authority, nor as members of a debating society, she said, but as partners in a practical enterprise. Our goal is simple: to solve problems, protect our citizens, and build a future where cooperation serves the needs of the governed rather than the convenience of the governors. As applause filled the chamber, Sarah Chen watched from the observation deck above. In just 18 months, the galaxy had transformed from a bureaucratic nightmare into something approaching functional governance. The old Galactic Council still existed, but it now represented fewer than 30 species, mostly those whose governments benefited from institutional paralysis. More importantly, its influence had dwindled to irrelevance as practical alternatives proved their effectiveness. Sarah's communicator buzzed with a message from Earth's monitoring stations. Long-range sensors had detected signs of an external threat approaching from beyond the galactic rim, something that would have triggered months of debate in the old council. She smiled and forwarded the message to the Alliance Emergency Response Center. Within hours, joint task forces would be mobilizing to investigate the threat. Within days, if necessary, coordinated fleets would be moving to address it. The galaxy had learned to function without asking permission first, and surprisingly, most beings seemed to prefer it that way. As she watched the new session begin below, Sarah reflected on humanity's unexpected journey from frustrated council members to architects of a new galactic order. They had walked away from a broken system and helped build something better in its place. The galaxy had indeed shaken when humans walked out, but now it was finally learning to stand steady on its own feet.